I'm Cyclone, and today I wanted to share with you the upgraded version of my Omniscient Archer, what I changed, what I upgraded into, what you can do to upgrade further from the point where I am from, and all the tiny details that I figured out about this build as like a conclusion to this character, as I don't think I will push this any further. I have done pretty much everything in the game. I've done a raid 30 simulacrum. Sadly, I wasn't recording at that time, so I cannot prove. You have to believe me in that regard. I managed to kill pretty much every end boss in the game, including the Fiat, but that was as a boss carry, and I died once, so I didn't record that either. But I recorded Maven kills in almost an instant. I've killed the Shaper Guardians, Elder Guardians. I killed Cyrus like he's butter. It's absurd what this build can do, and I definitely can recommend this. But this is not a starting version. If you're just looking to get started with an Omniscient Archer, I would recommend you looking into the description. I will put a link there to my Lightning Arrow starting thing, a starting Archer that can very quickly transition into Tornado Shot, which I will mention in a moment when it can do. But it's like a cheaper version to starters, and it's still very good, and eventually it will turn into this if you just put a bit of time and currency into it. And if you do not want to take my version, feel free, there are many other versions on the internet. Just know that this is not a starting guide, this is just what I did to increase upon my starting thing. I don't know why I keep doing these things, but that's whatever. Hey, post-edit Cyclone here. I need you guys' help. Or your opinion rather. So in this video I did kind of two different overlay things with the video. In the beginning I let the content run in the background full screen and made like tiny pop-ups or where I showed the skill gems. And I wanted to know if you like that thing, if I would just show the items, the skill gems, however what I'm currently talking about, or the other version where you see me, where you see what I'm pointing at, what I'm doing while I'm looking at the items, and just see the content like a footage of running maps or doing some stuff in the background or at some point on the side where I'm not pointing at stuff. Would really be helpful if you could tell me what you liked more. With that being said, enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, so first, when do you actually transition into Tornado Shot? So if you take a look at Tornado Shot, you see, that's the Tornado Shot, that's Tornado Shot. You see that it doesn't give any flat damage. It has attack damage and effectiveness of added damage, but it doesn't have any base damage. The reason for that is, actually I don't know the reason for that, but that is the reason why we use Lightning Arrow. Lightning Arrow does have a bit of base lightning damage, if we take a look here. Lightning Arrow has like 9 to 179 added lightning damage, and it's better early on as well because it can do a high shock, so it has more damage taken on the enemy.
Not up to that just yet.
That is why we use Lightning Arrow early on. It's just better, and also I wanted to use it, to be fair. But yeah, we want to use Lightning Arrow early on. It has added damage, so we have an easier time getting the build rolling because early on we don't have that much flat damage. Now once you have a proper bow, proper flat damage, you can transition your clear skill into Tornado Shot without any issues. If you're not using a physical bow, you don't even need a Anomalous. You just need that if you use a physical bow. Now for your single target, that can be changed way earlier. All you need is to have the gems at 20 quality and have enough levels in the Ballista totem support so that it says that you can place +2 to maximum number of summoned Ballista totems. Once you have that, you can easily switch your single target to a Ballista totem and it will feel good. For content wise, I think the reason when you should switch to it is if you want to do bosses or if you want to do delirium content. If it's just simple normal mapping like just legion farming, what I did at the start, or expedition farming, you don't need to get into the Ballista totems, although it won't hurt in any way. It's just that you have like this 1 second of setting up the totems, like let's take a look. You set up the totems and then you start shooting. It has a millisecond, not even a full second downtime in your applying your damage. but it's more damage overall, so it definitely is worth a change. And like I said, it's really good if you want to go for bossing or if you want to go for very hard content. The totem definitely outclasses Barrage. For simple mapping, Barrage is more than enough. That out of the way, I have actually forgotten in the last guide to mention that you want to kill all bandits, so I just mentioned it here for those who are still listening and want to league start this. So you can kill all bandits, and the Pantheon is early on you want Brine King to cannot be frozen, and Everest for Burning Grounds. I'm currently testing out Cache for the bleeding, because my flask is poison immunity, so I am not immune to Burning Grounds. Once I get full Almond immune, I am, and I am not immune to poison, so I use Poison Flask, and immune to normal bleed, and I'm immune to Corrupted Blood. And for the Greater Soul, you can use Soul of Lunaris once you're Freeze and Chill immune, because we don't need Brine King for that anymore. We use Lunaris for physical damage reduction. Projectiles that have changed cannot hit us, which is nice for invitations, and then just a tiny chance to avoid projectiles and reduce unlimited damage taken. It's also nice. So it's just more survivability. That is the Pantheon. So let's take a look at the Ascendencie now. Ascendencie from the last one hasn't changed too much. We are still using Ricochet, Endless Munition, Gathering Wind, and Focal Point. Now, that is my my personal preferred setup. We are using Point Blank, and we are using that's why we're not using Farshot for now. However, Farshot can do more damage. I will come to that in a moment. Ricochet is giving us the chain. The chain is really good for things like our single target will have the chain and our clear as a chain. It's going to be a lot more hits we get with the clear and a lot more hits we get with the single target. Endless Munition is the same. We're going to have more single target and more clear. Same as Gathering Winds, which will Gathering Wind gives us action and movement speed, so we can move away from enemies if they are dangerous, and we can attack them faster, so kill them faster. Just overall really good. And Focal Point is the only source of less damage taken we have. It's really just giving us a lot of survivability in invitations or simulacrums on high waves or in delirium maps when there are several unique enemies like Beyond and very juice stuff. So on high level, high difficulty, Focal Point is just way too good. Also, a huge amount of single target and extra damage. Now, some things that I do not like is Wind Ward. The reason I don't like Wind Ward is when you get hit, you lose your gale force, so you lose your movement speed and your attack speed, so you do less damage and can not escape as fast if you're getting hit, so I don't really like that. We're not a bleed put, so we're not using Rupturing. And Occupying Force, you could say, when you're mapping and moving that fast, why not take Occupying Force? Well, the issue with Occupying Force is if with the way we clear, we shoot forward and everything dies, so there shouldn't be anything behind us, so we don't need to leave any Mirage Archers behind. And lastly, there is Farshot. Now, Farshot would actually be an improvement, just because of when we run juice maps, we usually stand here, and the enemies are somewhere at the corner of our screen, because we kill everything that quickly, or hopefully. We're not using Barrage, so we don't really need the second part, but Farshot would be nice. And here we get to, okay, what about Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flash? And I think there are 4 options to consider getting that. One option would be Farshot or any of the others here, and then select Farshot instead. And the other options, let's head to the passive building for that, would be 2 on the Pathfinder and 1 on the Raider. Now, if we just look at damage numbers, we could consider Avatar of the Slaughter. Avatar of the Slaughter gives us movement speed, attack damage, and evasion rating per frenzy charge. Now, if we would do that, we would of course pick up Fervor and pick up Frenetic. Ignore that it is over the passive, we would sacrifice other passives of course for that, and we would get something like a 15% damage increase. Not too bad. It would definitely be an improvement, and we also get some movement speed, like 20% movement speed, so we could move a bit faster. We would, however, however, because we always generate frenzy charges. Ignore that part. That would be option 1. Option 2 would be the Master Surgeon. We would remove our Corrupted Blood immunity jewel and will take the 2 Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flash. We'll get bleed immunity. We would always have flask up, and we will no longer need a life flask, except if we do something like the most absurd bosses. Because when we have the flask, when we get hit, they gain charges, so with the crits and the charge gains, they fill up almost immediately, and then we have to recover 6 life. So the moment we are not in full life, which we are with Blood Rage, it should apply, and then when we get hit, we lose a bit and it regenerates almost instantly. So that is definitely nice, because with 5 flasks that do that, we would have 30% recovery of life every time we use a full set of flasks. Now, that is very pricey, and it only gives survivability, it doesn't give damage. So that is one option, another option. And then we have Veteran Bowyer. Currently very liked by the 5-way carries, but it would also definitely be an improvement for us. It would give us 15% of our physical, which in my case I am converting. This is not something for you if you're not a phys conversion build. We get 15% physical conversion. We get elemental resistance penetration, which is nice. We already have a lot, but more won't hurt. And we get the increased flask charge gained by killing enemies with ailments, so our flask fill faster. It requires us to kill compared to Master Surgeon, which just requires us to do a crit, but it still would be a good thing, and it can be considered using. And lastly, like mentioned, you can take Far Shot or any of Focal Point, Gathering Winds, Ricochet, or Endless Munition, and pick up Far Shot instead to have the increase in that. If you get Far Shot, I would say don't use Point Blank anymore. You could instead go for Long Shot to gain the increase there, and we could go for on the Bow Mastery, there is increased crit chance the further the bow travels, if you want to pick that up too. You would, however, need to spec into something like Farsight. I think that's the only Bow Mastery we still have in range. That are the potential Ascendencie upgrades. However, I checked, everything of that is way too pricey at the moment, so that is something that you should consider at the end of the upgrade chain. Okay. The rest of the passive tree doesn't change too much. I changed here, I'm not picking up Forces of Nature anymore, and I'm not really going for much else. I have picked up Primal Spirit, currently testing that out. It gives a bit of stats and it gives us mana on the hit. So at some point I can drop the Claw Mastery. The reason to drop up here would be that we can get a second cluster. Now there are two options for the second cluster we can get. When we drop Lionized Foil, we will lose a lot of crit and crit multi. So what we would get is a second cluster down here. That would be either a 12 passive large cluster with like 35 increased effectiveness of small nodes, flat life, a stat, and then either increased damage or another stat. That would be the best slot, or Chaos West would also be good. While that would be good, that is also very pricey because people have picked that up already. Alternative would be a second 8 passive bow cluster. We would get Devastator for explosion. Then we could get Calamitas for increased effect of ailments and just elemental damage. And then again, we could pick up Martial Prowess, or we could pick up Heavy Hitter, or whatever we prefer to have 3 passives on it. And on the medium clusters, we would then go for crit clusters, something like Basics of Pain, Pressure Point. That would be alternative upgrade to this. And the other changes that you can do are, you could also get an Interrogation. Interrogation is definitely a nice thing. I managed to get one dropped and tried it out, and it does increase your damage by quite a bit by just using Brittle, Zapped, and Shocked. If you cannot cap it out against bosses and you're running big bosses, you could consider getting increased effect of non-damaging elements on the Crit Mastery and on the Elemental Mastery, either here or here. That is an option too. And the last change that you need to do if you go for physical on the tree would be getting a Watcher's Eye with Hatred conversion, or speccing either into this or here to get physical conversion to cold to have fully converted physical damage. Now, one final thing that I want to mention here. Oh no, wait, there are two final things. You can get elemental avoidance on your jewels with Harvest, like or with corruptions. So for example, this one is corrupted, or you can use Harvest to get something like Ignite and Shock and Chill immunity to cap out your elemental avoidance if you're slightly below capped with getting the elemental avoidance on your gear. That is an option. And lastly, I wanted to take a look at my Lethal Pride. This is something I rolled myself, I got luckily, and pretty much all I go for is double damage. If we take a look at that, double damage we got here, here and here. We have 50% to deal double damage, and percentage. What is the word? Increased strength. So we have a percentage increased strength here, and we have a percentage increased strength here. So we have a 10% increased strength. Now, if you have double damage on any other source, you could consider to not. Oh no, sorry. You could consider to not go for double damage, and if you have a huge amount of increased strength, you could consider to just go for double damage. Also, something that is nice to have on top of all that is some increased max life, because that is just always good to have. So yeah, that are the tree changes and the potential tree changes. Now we come to the interesting part, which is the skill section and the item section. And for skills, there are two changes that I made. Obviously, I switched Tornado Shot in my single and I switched to Tornado Shot in my single and clear. I already mentioned that. Just going to quickly go over the links. We have Tornado Shot, Awakened Fork, Mirage Archer, Vicious Projectiles, Elemental Limitless Attacks, and Inspiration. Now, if you are not using Fist Conversion, you don't need Vicious Projectiles, you could go for Trinity instead. If you're not using Interrogation, you could go for Hypothermia, or you could go for GMP if you want even more projectiles, or you could go for crit damage. There are a lot of options. You don't need a Vicious Projectile, and you don't need to be Fist Conversion. For the single target, we have Tornado Shot, Elemental Limitless Attacks, Ballista Totem, Focused Ballista Totem, Critical Damage, and Visage Projectiles. Just a quick mentioning, you don't need Ballista Totems on a 2120, it doesn't get anything there. However, Focused Ballista gets 1 more damage and 1 more attack speed, so that is a nice to have at 2120. Okay, so now the other change was I used Blessed Hatred, or what I called my Hatred support with Life Tap and Divine Blessing. Now I'm using an Enlightened level 3 and with the Radiation Efficiency Helmet to fit Determination, Herald of Ash, and Hatred in my Aura setup, and fit, where is it? Precision and Defiance Banner on the other setup, outside of the Enlightened. Now that is a very consistent Aura effect, and we're using Molten Shell instead as a defensive upgrade, which we weren't able to fit before, but it is definitely a very nice upgrade. Also, something that we are able to fit, or kind of, is Blood and Sand. Now right now, I'm actually not using all auras. I'm having more mana than I should have. No idea. Sorry for the interruption. So we are using, we can consider using Blood and Sand. Blood and Sand with Anomalous gives us increased projectile speed, which the Mastery is always consistent damage upgrade. And I've seen people use it with Enhance on top, but that will need you to have a Perfect Vault, implicit mana reservation, so it needs to get you Exceptional and then use Orb of Conflict once, I think, to get to that stage. So it is a very pricey upgrade, and it's not really needed. I'm not even using it, as you can see. However, it would look good with MTX. But yeah, that is a skill thing. And now I quickly want to do some Arrow Mass, because there is something with Tornado Shot that makes it absolutely absurd once you have the Helmet Enchantment and Awakened Fork. So we have at the moment, we have Tornado Shot firing 6 projectiles or 8 with the Dying Sun, and it's after they fire to the maximum distance where you clicked at, they pierce into normally 3, but with the Helmet Enchantment into 4 projectiles. So the split will always happen first, and until then it will always pierce. Okay, so we have these 6 to 8 initial projectiles. Now, on top of that, let me open the calculator. So we have our, let's say, 8 projectiles in a map, and it splits into 4. So now we have 32 projectiles. The thing is that the 8 projectiles can hit, and then the arrows that split off them can hit again. The 8 projectiles cannot shotgun themselves, so they will hit through the boss once, or through the enemy once, and then the arrows that split can hit again. So when they fire backwards, we can hit the same enemy twice. That is definitely an awesome thing. But it doesn't end there. Now the split arrows, if they haven't hit the boss, they can still hit him because they went into other directions. And we're going to, for this arrow mask, we're going to consider that all arrows will hit something, so they continue chaining and forking. So now we have 2 forks, 1 chain, and then the potential to split if they hit a cross target or chain off a wall. But we're going to ignore those last 2. So we're going to take the first fork. So we have these 32 projectiles that are going to fork once. So we're going to get 64 projectiles now. Now, with the forking, it's not, the splitting and forking in general is not like they just are forced in this angle with a fork or in like a cross with a split. They are more like, they are kind of heat seeking. They have an angle they can take. For example, if an enemy is here and the fork would have gone like this, the fork can decide to go like this to that enemy and the other one will just go that way. So it's very likely that if there are enemies, that our forking will hit. So we have our first fork with 64 hits, and then we have a second fork. So now we had 128 arrows. So we have 128 arrows that now can chain one more time, and also can chain off terrain to go back to enemies that they might have missed. So we have another 128 hits. So if we add all that up, we have 128 plus 128 plus 64 plus 32 plus the 8 initial hits. So we have 8 initial arrows, and then 352 times our secondary arrows can hit something. Not always the same thing, but something. That is a lot of hits. And that is very absurd, and which is why I really like the Helmet enchantment with Tornado Shot Fire's additional secondary projectile. Just as why we use Awakened Fork over Chain, because if we would use Chain, let's do the math again for Chain. We have our 8, and they split into 4. Now they're going to hit once again, so we have Chain 1, then we have Chain 2, then we have Chain 3, and that's the end. Maybe we have Chain 4 because of Awakened Chain, okay. So we're looking at 160 hits. Now, okay, no, times 2. That is a less hit, so with Fork we have double the potential hits than we have with Chain. And I would say that is a pretty good improvement. And it's not like with Fork they won't hit. We have seen in maps before that Fork will hit a lot. So definitely something to consider if you haven't considered yet, to use Awakened Fork over Awakened Chain. It is a really absurd support, and it does a lot of damage and generates a lot of hits. Okay. So let's get finally into the gear section. I will split this into 3 subsections. The bow upgrade, the jewelry upgrade, and the quiver. I consider quiver to jewelry even though it's not. And then the armor upgrades. And lastly, I guess the flask, which is like not a full section, but I will quickly cover it. So I managed to make this physical bow. Now by no means you are needed or required to use physical bow. This works definitely well with an elemental bow, as we've seen by other content creators. So if you're not able to make a physical bow, it's too pricey, feel free to go with an elemental bow. I've used that pretty much for a whole 2 weeks and I was able to do most maps. I haven't tried bosses with it, but it was definitely not a bad option. I managed to make a physical bow, so I decided to use it, for that simple reason, because I had it. So the jewelries, you might still recognize this ring. It has the same suffixes as my first ring, it is the same one I bought. I just improved upon the prefixes with crafting on top of it, with something like prefix can be changed with Chaos Orb, and I got this result. Now, I did something similar for the other ring, another triple stat ring, another live, unveil, and then another craft. The Headhunter hasn't really changed. I threw a few more divines at it to get a bit better on it, but that's about it. Still haven't got an enchantment there. And lastly, I managed to get my hands on a double corrupted Omniscience. I made that myself too, like pretty much everything in this build except the Headhunter and some other uniques. I bought Omniscience, I divined it to 20 plus roll, Catalyst, Anointment, Double Corrupt, and on my first try I managed to get this, and I'm pretty happy with that. The Discipline is a bit wasted, but the rest of this is pretty good, and I'm happy to have it. Now lastly, we also have the Quiver. The Quiver, I improved upon a pure damage quiver to one that has a better life roll, and it got a dexterity roll, as well as a better base. It has a projectile speed base, which is speed and damage. Speed also makes our tornado shot travel further, so it means we can generate more hits. And yeah, that's about it. The Frenzy on Kill is a nice thing to have, but it's definitely not needed, as well as the Life on Kill. Those two are pretty much dead mods. I have it for the life, additional projectile, elemental damage with attacks, and the dexterity. Okay, now we get to the armor upgrades. And the armor upgrades are definitely interesting, and I will quickly go over what we have total, and then over the items per item. So what we are looking for in our armor is reservation efficiency, is elemental avoidance, and is a spell suppression. Now to get everything to 100, we need spell suppression on our gloves and body armor, we need elemental avoidance on our boots and body armor, and we need reservation efficiency on the helmet. To get everything combined, we're looking at like 100 spell suppression, badly roll or K roll, we're looking at 90, 96 elemental avoidance, and we're looking at like 17 to 20 mana reservation efficiency. So one by one, we're looking at the helmet first. The helmet, we want one of two things. So either we look like the Fluted Bastion that I'm using, armor evasion base with the Tornado Shot enchantment at level 980 or above. We don't even need 86, but that would be nice for some things. It's not required for anything we want to roll. And we are going to use Essence of Loathing to get mana preservation efficiency on it. And then we look for any stat suffixes or chaos resistance as a suffix. And for the prefix, we look at high armor, high percentage armor, and high life. And then on the implicits, we can use a lesser Searing Exarch and a lesser Ember for the reduced mana cost. And we use any tier of Eicher to get mana reservation efficiency. But the higher the better, because once we have more, we can use a higher level precision and we can use other stuff too. Okay. Next thing we have is our gloves. On the gloves, we are looking for following things. We are looking for some attack speed, spell suppression, stats, if we can. I got Fire Breath, which is a bit sad, so there's definitely room for improvement. And then high armor and high life for the prefixes again. For the implicits, we are looking either for Intimidation or Rage on the Searing Exarch and Spell Suppression on the Eater of Worlds influence. For the boots, we are looking for Elemental Avoidance, which can be either essential, used with an Essence for 35, or we're looking for Craft on Elemental Avoidance, and then stats is suffix, and for the prefix, high life, high movement speed. And then either some evasion rating, some armor, or pretty much whatever. And lastly, for the implicits, we're looking for action speed and more elemental avoidance. If you're only having a crafted elemental avoidance on body armor and boots, you need 30% elemental avoidance on the implicit on the boots, making them quite pricey in that department. And lastly, on the body armor, we are looking for, like I said, avoidance as a suffix, spell suppression as a suffix, and then either chaos rest or stats. And for the prefix, we're looking for high life, preferable unveiled elemental avoidance, if not crafted, and then hopefully unveiled max life. And on the implicits, we're looking for hatred effect and generic aura effect. Now, if you're using the elemental version, you might not be using hatred, so then you would look for something like anger aura effect or grace aura effect or determination aura effect instead. But with this, we're looking for grace. And that is pretty much all the gear. Now for the flask, once you get armor evasion hybrid gear, you can look to get an a granite flask of armadillo instead to get a lot of armor there. The quicksilver flask pretty much with either movement speed or attack speed, either is fine. And on the diamond flask, I prefer to have curse effectiveness, because some curses can be quite annoying. So we use reduce curse effect on the flask instead of using with quick chance, because once we have brutal, once we have some gear, long shot, the mastery or something, we have pretty much 100 crit all the time. Dying Sun still with charge when full. Once you have enough damage, once you have enough clear, you don't really need this on call anymore, so you can just use them full. And lastly, instant life flask with either poison or bleed immunity. Now on the last video I said use the flask that has more recovery. Now that was pretty good, but it sadly wasn't good enough for high juice stuff or for bosses where the instant one is just too good to pass up on. And lastly, I have one more thing that I forgot that I have